Okay, so good day, class. For this part of the video recording, we're going to talk about the idea of validity. Okay, so in our previous lesson, we have already discussed or at least touched on the main idea of validity, which is that the test that you're going to create should actually measure your objectives or usually yung mga construct na balak mo talagang i-measure. So in this case, we'll look at a formal definition of validity by Macmillan stated in the 2017 book, wherein validity is defined as a characteristic that refers to the appropriateness of the inferences, uses, and consequences that result from the assessment. It is also concerned with the soundness, trustworthiness, and legitimacy of the claims or inferences that are made based on the obtained scores. Okay, so what we need to get from this definition is that validity talks about a lot of things. Number one is the score that is obtained from the test kasi yun yung pinakauna nating nakukuha. So each of the quizzes that we make, the rubrics that we use to determine the performance of the learners, okay, all of those things have or yield a score. Okay, so validity tackles with the idea, with the question that are these scores actually reflecting the constructs that we are measuring? So aside from the scores, we also make inferences based on this scores. Okay, so dito yung evaluation na ginagawa natin usually, di ba? What scores are actually within the passing grade, what scores are considered as failed, what types of performances are satisfactory, and what is not. Because from these evaluations, we make further inferences on the judgments of our students. If they will pass a course, if they will fail, and otherwise, we also make inferences on our class. Do we continue with our course? Do we adjust our objectives? Do we reevaluate? Do we make another test instrument, etc., etc.? Okay, so again, what's important is that even if you get the scores, okay, from a so-called valid test, your ability as a teacher to make proper inferences or valid inferences based on these scores is also under the idea of validity. So another definition given through validity or given to validity is by Popham in 2017. Sabi niya, there are disagreements on the concerns of validity when it comes to the test. Number one, is validity concerned with the accuracy of test-based interpretation regarding what a test taker know or can do? Or is it the consequences of usage, that is, the appropriateness of the uses of test-based interpretations? So what does this mean? Okay, this means that there are some arguments. Ang validity ba, ma-establish mo na ba pag naiayos mo, okay, yung mga test-based interpretation? Meaning kung maayos ba yung evaluation mo, okay? Or is it concerned with how you use a test, how the scores are actually obtained from the tests, and how fair, how usable these tests are? Okay? So yung dalawang lumulutang na arguments when it comes to validity. Sabi rin ni Popham, dapat daw ang test ay tinetest for accuracy on specific uses only. Okay? So, for example, I have a test in mathematics. It should not test the overall mathematical skills of my students. It should test a more specific construct that is related to the objective. For example, if I'm testing the ability of the students to manipulate algebraic notations, then my test would focus on that. I would not use or I would not evaluate my test based on the idea of the students' algebraic skills. Kasi kahit specific yung algebraic skills, it's still very general. Okay? So I still have to cut it down. Okay? Ano bang algebraic skills ang titignan ko? Is it getting the variables? Is it manipulating the equation? Is it making a representation of the algebraic skills etc., etc. Okay? Sabi kasi ni Popham, this specificity implies that a test is valid for one assessment purpose, but its validity is not retained for other purposes. Okay? Kaya nga meron tayong smart framework. And yung mga tests na ginagawa natin ay base sa mga objectives that are smart. Meaning, in order for a test to actually be measured as valid, dapat specific yung mga yung mga mini-measure nila na constructs. Okay? So, sorry for that. Naputol yung ating recording. So, I'll just upload this as a secondary part. Anyway, moving on. So, when we're talking about this, okay, let's move on to the next paragraph here. Additionally, Popham asserts that the test instruments themselves do not have validity, as the issue remains firmly at are the interpretations based on the scores valid? Okay? And adds that even well-constructed tests require circumstances and proper administration to produce valid interpretations. So, ano sinasabi ni Popham dito? What Popham says is that the test itself is not valid. It must be used at a particular circumstance. For example, a test is made for grade 8 students located in Las Piñas. Okay? So that test is valid only for that set of students. Or kung meron kang standardized test, pwede mo sabihin, this test is made for students in the Philippines, which follows this particular curriculum. Okay? Hindi po siya ginawa para sa mga estudyante sa labas ng Pilipinas or sa mga estudyante na merong ibang curriculum na pinagdadaanan. Okay? This test is made for an environment that is not exposed to extreme temperatures. The small things like that, okay, affect the validity or affect how validity is established in a test. Okay, diba? Pag nag-stress, for example, you make a test instrument measuring how do you call this? The skills of the students when it comes to running. Okay. So sa test na yun, may mga assumptions siya like is the field well maintained? Grass ba yung field? Sand ba? Anong uri ng sand? Etc. etc. Because these things are what you consider when you are making a test. For a pen and paper test, anong kinoconsider mo? Objectives. Okay? Kayo, when you will go into the DepEd, you will consider what? You are going to consider the curriculum guide in order to measure if your test is valid for a particular construct. Okay? So, ganun po ibig sabihin ni Popham po dito. The test itself is not valid. It is only valid when looked at in a specific lens when using appropriate environments or appropriate situations and administrations. Kasama po yun in establishing test validity. Okay? So, sabi ni Popham, meron tayong mga dalawang hypothesis na kailangang i-reject. Okay? Kailangan natin ipakita na walang ganitong uri ng situation sa ating test. These two situations or hypothesis is content underrepresentation and construct irrelevant variance. Okay? So, according to Popham, content underrepresentation is when a test fails to capture all of the aspects of a construct. So, ito po yung binigay ko example. Another example sa mathematics po yan. Okay? So, I'm going to give another example. For example, sa, science, for example? Okay. For example, sa science, pinag-uusapan ninyo yung parts of a cell. Okay? So, if you want to test your students on the knowledge of the parts of the cell, each and every part na naituro mo, it should have involvement in the test. Meaning, kung tinuro mo yung mitochondria, cell wall, nucleus, Golgi apparatus, etc., etc., dapat lahat yun magpapakita, kung hindi man as a test item, dapat magpakita siya as a distractor, as a key, or as a identification. Okay? Basta po lahat ng iyon ay papasok doon sa test mo. Okay? What this implies is that each and every idea that is exposed during the topic must again be represented in the test. Otherwise, meron kang content under representation. Pag tinuro mo lahat ng figures of speech sa English, kailangan kasama lahat yon sa short quiz or sa quiz na gagawin mo. Okay? Kaya, ganito yung idea natin. Pag, maraming tinuturo si sir or ma'am, marami rin yung test items. Because we as teachers want to avoid content under representation. Dapat lahat ng naituro natin ay kasama doon sa test na gagawin po natin. Next, you have construct irrelevant variants. So when you're talking about construct irrelevant variants, sabi ni Popham, this is a test weakness in which test takers' scores are influenced by factors that are extraneous to the construct being assessed. Meaning, meron ka mga naidadagdag na errors na hindi naman connected sa construct mo. Okay? This is very apparent when you are looking at a construct that requires prerequisite. Okay? So, ano po ba ibig sabihin nito? When you are using things that are outside of the student's knowledge. So, for example, sa mathematics, okay? Sa mathematics, you want to simply assess the problem-solving skills of the learners regarding linear equations. Okay, or mga simple algebraic notation on the first degree. Okay? Tapos bigla ka naglalagay ng mga second degree polynomials. Bigla ka naglalagay ng graphing. Bigla ka naglalagay ng mga complicated words na hindi naman nagsiserve to improve the problem skills of the learners. Okay? Another thing. For example, nagpapatest ka sa history. Okay? History of the Punic Wars, for example. Or history ng revolusyon sa Pilipinas. Okay? Tapos bigla mong ipapasok yung mga recent events like martial law. Okay? Bigla ka magpapasok ng ilang taon ang nakalipas bago ang ganito ganyan. Whereas, hindi naman yun yung minimeasure mo. These items, these things that are disconnected from the topic but still is added to the test represent construct irrelevant variants. Okay? So, kung yung isa kulang ka sa content, ito naman sobra-sobra ka sa nilagay na content na yung mga nailagay mong content ay hindi naman connected doon sa test na gagawin mo. Bawal po ito. Violation po ito. Okay? So, yun po yung dalawang iniiwasan natin according to Popham. Now, as you can see here, there are 4 sources of validity evidence, which I'm going to talk about in the next video recording. Okay? So, for now, ito po muna. Again, when we're talking about validity, we're talking about valid ba yung mga scores na naibibigay ng ating mga tests. Pangalawa, valid din ba yung mga pinagagamitan natin na evaluations that are based on these tests. Okay? Ang validity, ginagamit for specific purposes, hindi general purposes. Hindi po nare-retain ang validity when you use it in different circumstances, in different administrations from what is actually designed. Okay? So kayo po, pag gagamit ng test online, hindi na po nare-retain yung validity niyan. Especially kapag hindi mo po alam kung para saan ginawa yung test na iyan. And when we are making tests, meron tayong dalawang iniiwasan. Content under representation, ito yung kakulangan ng representation ng bawat idea, bawat content na present mo sa lesson. And construct irrelevant variants. Ito yung nagdadagdag ka ng hindi naman kailangan idagdag na complications sa iyong test item. Okay? So that is all for the concept of validity and what the pitfalls in validity is. Okay? So I'll see you all on the next recording. Bye, class.